Hello everyone, this is Samuel Chang here for Joiner English, and today we are going to be proceeding with day 7 of our ACT Prep Steps to Success class. And day 7 will start our reading strategy lessons. So today's reading strategy lesson will be lesson 1. So what we're going to be doing in reading strategy class is we are going to be going over your diagnostic exam, because there's not really a better way to discuss reading strategy other than going over actual problems. So I thought, well, you all have already taken your diagnostic exam, so I might as well go over the same problems with you. So today we're going to be doing questions 1 to 20, and then in reading strategy lesson 2 we're going to be doing questions 21 to 40. So let's get started. And ignore all of this stuff I have at the top, the instructions. That was for, when we were in class. But we will go ahead and get started with passage 1. I'm sure you all remember passage 1. If not, you can pause the video here and go back and review. But passage 1 talks about, of course, Bombay and a narrator's, relationship with Bombay, right? And that just happens to be our first question. So sometimes you see that the first question here is... the first question here is obviously kind of sometimes what you're thinking when you finish reading the passage, right? Kind of what you're thinking the main idea is. So the passage as a whole can primarily be characterized as the narrator's. Well, the way I'm going to do each of these problems is I'm going to go through, sometimes I'm going to go through all the answers, sometimes I'm only going to go through, the correct one and tell you why it's correct. But the reason why I'm doing this kind of not in the same way for every question is because there are some questions that are harder and you need to go over all the answer choices and rule them out with process of elimination. And then there are, of course, some that you can, just read the 4 questions and you're like, I know which one's correct. So you just move on that way. So let me get a pen here. So it says the passage as a whole can primarily be characterized as the narrator. So when we're talking about the passage as a whole being characterized as a narrator's, of course they're looking for an object there. A narrator's explanation, a narrator's description, a narrator's argument, or a narrator's concerns, right? So those are the 4 important words. And obviously you can say, well, the narrator's not arguing, so to speak, for Bombay's prominence. So you might start on any answer choice once you've read all of them, right? You're looking at, well, is it an argument for Bombay's prominence in the world? No, right? It is not, because, Bombay's not really that famous in the world for architecture. We have concerns about the emotional environment in which the narrator was raised. Is he concerned about his emotional health when he's growing up? No, he's just saying that he doesn't like it that his parents are, putting more attention on the city and their architecture than they are on him, the baby, right? So it's definitely not concerns, which leaves us with 2, explanation and description, which is really interesting because those are, 2 really important words, explanation and description, which mean literally almost the same thing. So let's look at the content. Description of important buildings and locations in Bombay. Do you see a list of locations and buildings and telling you how, important or, their qualities? No, you don't. So that's obviously not right, which makes our answer A. And our answer is A because it's explaining, and this is what I said earlier, right? Basically the passages, when you finish reading the passage, you're thinking, well, this is the relationship between the narrator and his parents and Bombay, right? Basically a triangular relationship, right? So this is, a perfect answer, right? Moving on to question 2, and I know you've done the diagnostic exam already, but if you need to think about a question before I go over the answer, feel free to pause the video immediately after I change the slide to another question so you can think about the question again. That's probably a good thing to do. Let's look at question 2. The narrator describes the photos by Bombay's first-rate photographers as primarily inspiring the narrator to. So first-rate photographers. Where do we see Bombay's first-rate photographers? Well, you see around lines 60, 61, and 62, right? It was from my father that I learned of Bombay's first-rate photographers. whose portraits of the city became my first artistic influences, if only by showing me what I did not want to do. Okay, so inspiring the narrator to turn away from a career in photography? Is it saying that the narrator does not want to take pictures? No, it's saying that the stuff that's happening inside of the pictures is not something the narrator wants to do. So this is a really tricky answer, but it's not right. Create grand panoramas of the new Bombay. Does it say anything about panoramas? Well, Dayal climbed the Rajabai Tower to create his sweeping panoramas of the birth of the city, but does it says panoramas once. Does it focus on how the narrator wants to create panoramas? No, sometimes you'll see the word in there, but it doesn't necessarily mean the narrator is focusing or the narrator is, putting attention on a certain point. Then they trick you by doing that. H says, produce images that his father would add to his collection. Did his father have a picture or a photo album collection? Not really. It's saying his father, introduced him to, well, his father has a collection of old photographs, yes, but does his father have a huge collection that, his son wants to add to? Not really. His son is getting interest from, looking at his father's collection and looking at, the interesting things that happened in the past and the great photographs. It doesn't say that he wants to become a photographer and keep adding to that collection, because that collection, first of all, is not of his father's photographs. It's a collection of, photographs from ancient people. He's not going to add to that, obviously. Well, that's not right. Which leaves us with the correct answer, J. Photograph subjects that depict everyday life on Bombay's streets. So if we look at everyday life on Bombay's streets, it says right here, on line 70, from the heights you see only pinnacles. I yearned for the city streets, the knife grinders, the water carriers, etc., etc. And then it lists a bunch of, careers. I yearned for life. And before that, in line 67, it says their images were awe-inspiring, unforgettable, but they also inspired in me a desperate need to get back down to ground level. So that obviously, because he's listing all of these, everyday life careers and stuff that people do, right? And he's saying, well, these touch me, right? These are good for me to photograph, and they inspire me. So that's what, he's inspired to do. He's inspired, notice the key word here, he's inspired to photograph subjects that depict everyday life. Everyday life being, the thing they're trying to describe there. So that's really important. Question 3. Again, pause the video here if you need to review something. In lines 25 to 31, the narrator muses over, then rejects the notion that. So what does 25 to 31 say? These are one of the best questions, because if they give you a specific line number and they ask for, a notion or something that explicitly stated in the text, then you don't even need to think much. You just need to read the lines and choose the correct answer. It says, in the 10 years before my own coming into the world, the city had been a gigantic building site, as if it were in a hurry to become, as if it knew it had to provide itself in finished condition by the time I was able to start paying attention to it. And then it says, no, I don't really think along such solipsistic lines. And you might not know what solipsistic means. In fact, the first time I read this, I didn't either. But solipsistic in this case means arrogant or self-centered. So if you know that, well, that's good for you. But if you don't, you can still answer the question. It says, the narrator muses over, then rejects the notion that merchant played an important role. Well, no, he's saying that they played an important role in the whole passage. It's saying that, that's not right, because Merchant was his father and mother's company, right? That definitely played an important role. Notion that he started paying attention to Bombay at a young age, this is the opposite. He's saying, by the time I was able to start paying attention to it, meaning that he grew up before he paid attention to it. So that's wrong. His anticipated birth was one of the causes of the rush to finish the building of Bombay. So remember, it says muses over, then rejects. Always read your question well. It says muses over, then rejects. Why does it say that? Well, it says that because, they're looking for an exact thing that he is thinking about, then he's rejecting. So, he's saying, well, as if it knew it had to provide itself in a finished condition. And then he says, no, I don't really think along such solipsistic lines. So obviously, he's refuting his own thought that his anticipated birth was one of the causes. So that's the correct answer. And the last answer says Bombay had been a gigantic building site in the years before he was born. Now, not really, right? Well, yes, it had been I misspoke. It had been a gigantic building site, correct. He does not muse over then reject that. He looks at this statement and he's like, yeah, that's correct. He muses over it, then he accepts it. He doesn't reject it. Okay, and I spent a lot of time on these first 3 questions. I'm going to go over these a bit faster, because this one I really shouldn't have to go over all 4 answer choices. So let's go a bit faster. Lines 32 to 43. Which of the following literary devices? This one's easy. 32 to 43. Jealousy of the city. You can read this yourself. You probably already read it. Jealousy of the city. The city was had a romance with his parents. The city shared parental responsibilities. The city, my mom was out there with her, with Bombay. So what's the correct answer? Well, it's obviously H, personification, because it's making Bombay a person. That's, kind of taking away his parents' love from him. 5. Which of the following statements best captures how the narrator's parents balance their parental duties with their work at the construction company? Well, I don't really have to go over text for this because you've already read text. You can just, rule out the ones that aren't true. The narrator's mother did the majority of the work. Just read that, and it's like, that's not right, right? So, think about what the answer is, but what the answer is not as you read these questions. Did the mother do the majority of the work? Nope, you don't even have to read on. So let's look at the next one. Parents traded off responsibility while taking care of the narrator and working at their construction company. That seems to be what it says, so that's the correct answer. Father worked at his designing board while the mother took the narrator along to building sites. No, it's talking about his father taking the narrator along to building sites, not his mother, so that's not right. Parents both worked at the construction company while the narrator stayed at home with a babysitter. That's the first one you should rule out, right? Question 6, as it is used in line 9, I'm going at a bit faster pace because I don't want to keep you all here for hours on end, but make sure you're pausing the video and thinking about stuff if you're confused about anything. As used in line 9, the word sweep most nearly means, and line 9 says the glittering Art Deco sweep of Marine Drive. So what's an Art Deco sweep? Or what is a sweep of artworks? Well, it's, a kind of a broad area of artworks, right? And you kind of have to know what the word sweep means, but you can also look around. You can be like, well, what does the things around sweep say? Well, in line 9 it says there is, the Brabourne Stadium, there's the Kumbala Hills, and it's looking at an Art Deco sweep. So, what is it? Well, they're not searching for art. They're not, they don't have victory over art. They're not removing art. Well, it's just a broad area of art, right? Pretty easy. Context clues there. In the context of the passage, the primary function of lines 6 to 10 is, well, when it says, let me go over this question specifically, because it says in the context of the passage. What does it say in the context of the passage? Well, because the passage here is extremely, extremely important to answering this question. Not that, just the specific section of the passage. No, they're telling you you have to have read the whole passage. And then you're like, well, in context of the passage, what role is line 6 to 10 serving? What does it tell me in relation to the other stuff in the passage? 6 to 10 says, Malabar and Kumbala Hills were our capital and Palatine. The Brabourne Stadium was our Colosseum. And as for the glittering Art Deco sweep of Marine Drive, well, that was something not even Rome could boast. So the primary function is obviously, to compare architectural landmarks in Bombay to those elsewhere. That one's not hard. The rest of them they're either ridiculous or, they're just, they either make you laugh or, they're just wrong. There's nothing much to say. But you have to say in the context of the passage, because that could serve a lot of other stuff. That could, be bragging about, Bombay-style architecture. D is a very tricky answer, right? Let me write trick here. D is a very tricky answer to provide examples of Bombay-style architecture in Rome, which is true, right? They are doing that, but that's not the main main reason. They're trying to, if this were reversed, it'd be correct. Provide examples of Rome-style architecture in Bombay, right? That's the more accurate statement. 8. The narrator as a child viewed the work his parents did for Merchant and Merchant with a strong sense of... So it's pretty easy. Look at the same thing that we looked at for personification, same section there. I think this is paragraph 3, starting with line 32. Yeah, so, and it literally says, jealous of the city in which I was raised. So, yeah, don't even look. Just put the correct answer. Some of these I'm just moving on, because it's ridiculous to take a second look. Line 38, the phrase drew up most nearly means. So, it says, they drew up a weekly list of shared parental responsibilities. Well, what is drawing up a list? Well, it's preparing a list, right? Pretty simple, right? If you draw up a grocery list, you prepare, you write down a grocery list. The rest of these are not, they just don't fit. 10. In the last paragraph, the narrator's father shows the narrator the photos of storefronts and piers in order to, this one goes really well, with question 2. And, it says the narrator's father showed him still lives of storefronts and piers. It says, see where people lived and worked and shopped. He's not convincing the narrator of great photographers. That's not right. Is he teaching the narrator about commercial progress? Not really. He's really, trying to make the narrator see the people, not, the progress or, the money or the nature of the city. He's making the narrator see the people, because the people are the city, he ends up saying later on. So that's not right. Clarify his claim that the photo collection was not about modern-day Bombay, but rather about the early 20th century. We really didn't even have to read the rest of this. Clarify his claim that the photo collection was not about modern-day Bombay. That's all we had to read. Did he ever have that claim? No, he didn't. He never made that claim, so that answer's wrong. J. Illustrate that photos of places can reveal as much about the people who spent time there as photos of the people themselves. That is interesting. It says, I, his photographer son, set out to prove him wrong, to show that a camera can see beyond the surface, beyond the trappings of the actual, and penetrate to its flesh and heart. That's what it's saying, right? Places can reveal as much about the people as photos of the people themselves, right? Because he's taking storefronts and piers photos with no people in them. But he's saying, well, those photos can show just as much as, photos of people's faces. Yeah. So here's passage 2. Kind of moving on. Notice there's 10 questions per passage and 4 passages, right? So here's passage 2. And this is another single passage with questions, right? And passage 3, I believe, is a passage with 2 mini passages that you're going to have to compare and contrast. But this one's still another one with a single passage. And we'll get into passage 3 in day 8. Passage 2 is about the Kramer in the Sargasso Sea, right? And the Kramer, of course, being a ship that is just serving as, kind of an introduction there. But then the Sargasso Sea is and the rift beneath it is kind of the main point of the passage. Let's look at question 11. If you need to review the passage again, pause the video here and review it. As well as the questions. If you need to review every question, as soon as I move on the slide, you can pause, right? So, question 11, the author's attitude toward the main subject of the passage can best be described as... what's the main subject of the passage? Well, it's the Sargasso Sea. And the author throughout, you should just have gotten this sense while you're reading the passage. If you were reading it really intensely, like if you spent, 4 minutes or 5 minutes reading this passage, trying your best to understand every little bit that was in the passage, then there's no way you could have missed this, right? The author's attitude toward the main subject is one of awe and fascination. There's nothing you could miss about this, right? If you were just skimming and you might not have gotten, like the author's connotations of the author's word, if you were not, paying attention when you were reading, then maybe you didn't get this. But definitely, if you were paying full attention when you were reading, you definitely got this. The passage makes it clear that these three elements were names that people gave to what was actually. So where does this occur, first of all? Well, let's find it first. Well, it is in paragraph 3, right? Starting with line 33. Paragraph 3, line 33. It says, Middle Ground, Telegraph Plateau, and Dolphin Rise were names that they gave to what? An ancient and drowned land bridge? You sure? You'd be tempted to put H, right? Is that right, though? Keep reading, though. It's definitely not right. I'll go ahead and tell you that. This is kind of a trick question. Because some people, when they're in a rush, they literally read this question. They're like, ooh, it says it, an ancient and drowned land bridge. And it literally copied that from the passage. And they're like, ooh, that's right. And then, I stand here telling you that, everything is obvious on the ACT. And, there's a lot of stuff that you can look at the passage directly and get. But you have to realize, ancient and drowned land bridge is, something that people in the past thought it was. What does it say later on? It says, later on, it is, kind of a great valley, right? An immense mountain range in the Atlantic Basin. So don't get tricked by letter H, because they said ancient people thought it was a drowned land bridge, but no, it is not. It is also not either of those, because that's ridiculous. But a lot of people will put H, but what's the correct answer? J, because that is what, scientists have found that it actually is to this day. Be careful in those questions. In the first paragraph, the author describes the stillness of the Sargasso Sea as the Kramer passes through it, primarily to emphasize that the stillness, what? Well, the stillness... Where does it say the stillness? In the first paragraph, right? It says, this vast, unroughened surface. Unroughened means, calm and smooth, right? This breadth of uniform sea deceives. That's the correct answer. Deceives. That's what'll lead you to the correct answer. And then what else does it say? It says, but for a few lonely oceanic islands, the unperturbed surface, again meaning the calm surface, offers no hint of the grand and sweeping energies hidden below. So what's the answer? It's obvious, right? It's in dramatic contrast to the power of what exists below. It's literally just restating that sentence. Question 14. The passage states that compared to Arizona's Grand Canyon, the canyon that lies within the mountains in the Atlantic Basin is considerably, and you'll realize, in this video, I'm guiding you toward the correct, answer in the text. That's only, if I give you the correct answer and you find if I give you the correct section of text and you find the correct answer, that's only half the struggle. The other half is actually finding, the correct portion of text to look at. So that requires more practice. But I can't, sit here and spend so much time explaining to you how to find the correct piece of text. You just have to be, familiar enough with the passage to just know. That comes with the first time that you read the passage. Like I said, you should give yourself, time to read the passage before you even start looking at the questions, because that'll kind of, put an impression in your mind about where to find specific things, okay? And that's why we're making strategy videos, because you need to have that strategy. You need to think about, you need to think about stuff when you're reading it the first time. You need to think about, what section contains what, and, put that in your mind. Even if you don't know exactly where it is, at least you know what paragraph it's in, and you can go back and quickly find it. And, I'm guiding you toward the correct section of text, but, you need to practice finding that yourself. 14. The passage states that compared to Arizona's Grand Canyon, the canyon that lies within the mountains in Atlantic Basin is considerably... Well, where's the section of text that says that? Well, this is in paragraph 5 in line 65. It says extends for about 280 miles is the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon extends for 280 miles. How about the Rift Valley in the ocean, the canyon in the ocean? Well, it's 11,000 miles, and it says length. So what's the answer? Well, it's longer, right? 11,000 miles is greater than 280. That's pretty simple, right? And in the text, you'll literally see these numbers right here outlined, and it says the length. Pretty easy. 15, we're almost done here for today's lesson. The main purpose of the information in lines 71 to 76 is to, well, this guides you directly toward the lines, and these are the easy questions. You don't need to spend too much time on these. Go to the text quickly, get the answer, and move on. Here in this bleak and forbidding place where the water is almost freezing, subterranean fires have lifted mounds of fresh lava. And then it says, otherworldly setting in this distant, lifeless planets. So otherworldly settings after distant, lifeless planets. So it's comparing this Rift Valley as, alien planets, right? A barren place, that's kind of like Mars or another planet that humans have never set foot on, right? So what's the answer? It's literally what I just said, an alien, barren place. And, the rest of these answers are ridiculous, right? In 71 to 76, there is no statistic. There's no numbers. Statistics are numbers, right? There's no numbers. There's no statistics. List the names. Did they list names? No. Describe in detail their expectations for their first trip to the Rift Valley. Well, they're visiting the Rift Valley, but are they expecting this? No, they're discovering it when they get there. They're not expecting it, so that's not right. That's very tricky, though. Some students will put this one. This one's a trick answer, and I'll mark that as well for you. But that one's a trick answer because a lot of students will say, well, they're expecting that, so it's A, without reading B, which is a problem, right? Always read all your answer choices. 16, one of the main purposes of the last paragraph is to state that let's look at the last paragraph. Yet what had seemed so foreign to scientists is an integral part of Earth's very being. For at the ridge our own planet gives birth. So you only have to read the first sentence of that paragraph to kind of get the whole main purpose of the last paragraph, right? So what's the answer to this one? Well, it's obviously that the entire Atlantic seafloor has issued from the gases. Well, you might think it's F. The first time I looked at this, I thought it was F, right? But are the gases continuing to increase in width? Is that the correct answer? Is that right? Not really, right? It's not saying the gases are getting wider. It's saying from the gases is emerging lava, which is making ground. And while the gases are getting further and further apart, the space inside is being filled by, that lava, and it's hardening. So the gases are not getting wider. That's not happening. So read this specifically to rule that answer out. Seafloor has cooled. It says heat leaking from the molten core. It doesn't say it's cooled. It's issued, entire Atlantic seafloor has issued from the gases. So it's saying, well, Earth is, everything, like all of the land on the seafloor has issued from these gases, right? It's inferring that. If you read the paragraph, it's saying, well, the seafloor is, getting, wider and wider because of why? Well, because there is land inching out from these gases and, filling up the seafloor, right? That's the correct answer. Volcanoes on Earth's dry land? No, we're talking about the ocean floor. That's not right. There are some answers you can rule out immediately. Author most strongly implies that people commonly assume the deepest waters of an ocean are... So this is an assumption, right? So what's the answer to this assumption? Well, the first time I looked at this, I was very, very confused as well. Why was I confused? Well, because I was like, the author never says this. And it's kind of like, the first question we did, the author's attitude. The author never says, I'm in awe, I'm fascinated. The author doesn't say that, right? You just kind of have to infer. So if you've read, the passage very specifically, and you've read it kind of with a lot of focus. Now, if you've done that, then you'll know. It's just like you knew awe and fascination, right, was the author's attitude. You'll know, what the author is assuming. And the author here is assuming that most people think it's at the middle of the ocean, that the deepest waters are at the middle of the ocean, which is a false assumption. And he spends most of the passage, proving that wrong, but then not really, explicitly proving it wrong, but he spends the whole passage implicitly proving it wrong. He's saying the seafloor is not in the middle of the ocean, but it is the deepest part, right? So that assumption is obviously wrong, but the author does imply that the people commonly assume that. Dotted with islands located in trenches is what he's trying to prove, but that is not, what he implies that people already know, or he wouldn't be writing this, right? Dotted with islands, well, yes and no, right? But, islands obviously emerge from trenches, but he's not saying that a lot of people, think that islands are, the deepest waters, because the shallowest waters are kind of where islands are, because that those trenches have already immersed so much lava that it's created an island. So that must be the shallowest. About 1,000 miles offshore, he gives no intention of that. 18. As used in line 19, the phrase paid out most nearly means. So what does paid out mean? Well, this one's easy. Just go to line 19 and answer the question. Line 19 says, one naval officer paid out 8 miles of hemp rope. So they're trying to prove how deep it is. And he paid out 8 miles of hemp rope. And nothing happened, right? Concluded the sea had no bottom. So what is paying out hemp rope? Well, he's standing on the edge of a ship, and he's like, taking this huge rope, and he's like, kind of paying it out. So he's kind of like releasing it into the sea to see when it hits the bottom. And it never hit the bottom, right? So what does paid out mean? It means dispensed. Yeah, pretty easy. 19, according to the passage, we're almost done. The mountain range in Atlantic's basin covers nearly the same amount of Earth's surface as does what? Now, I'm going to point you to the right section again, but I want you to think about how you might find this section yourself. Obviously, I'm going to have to look for this one as well, but you'll see that it is around line 50, okay? And it says it covers almost as much of Earth's surface as the dry land of continents, which is the correct answer. But this is basically testing to see if you can find it in the article. If you read this article closely enough the first time through, that you can find, the details. You don't have to memorize all the details. You just, you have to read it so carefully the first time through that you kind of know where all the details are. So that's just testing you and trying to waste your time looking through the passage, right? So make sure you're familiar with the passage after you closely read it the first time. 20. According to the passage, the white cover on the peaks of the mountains in Atlantic's basin is... the white cover. Where do we see that? Well, we see that in around line 55, right? So, and it literally says that here's another one that's trying to waste your time. Same as the last question. You can see this is exactly the same as the last question. It just says according to the passage, doesn't give you a line, and then asks you something that the passage explicitly states. It said, the passage around line 57 says, by a thin patchy covering of white, the skeletal remains of tiny microscopic animals. Okay. That's pretty simple. You found it. And if you found it quickly, then, you saved your time and you got the question right. There's nothing really to worry about that if you're familiar with the passage. So, that brings us to the end of passage 2 and to the end of day 1 of ACT reading strategy. So I'm hoping throughout today's lesson you kind of realized, how we approach questions without just, panicking when we see something we don't know, how we rule answers out, and how we eventually get to 2 answers that we might, have a sense for, have a gut instinct for. And then there are some questions that you don't even have to do that. There are some questions that, are so obvious or inferred if you read the passage well, right, the first time. And then there are some questions that are just trying to waste your time, like 19 and 20 that we just went over, that, trick you into spending a lot of time looking through the passage and not finding the detail they're wanting, right? So remember, 3 types of questions, right? The type that you have to rule answers out for, the actually hard type that might not be explicitly stated. The second type, of course, is, the type that, you kind of get a sense for if you closely read the passage the first time. And the third type is the type that's trying to waste your time looking through the passage. And if you're familiar enough, your time won't be wasted. So keep in mind those three types of questions, and also keep in mind that don't spend too much time on any one question, because if you spend too much time on one question, you're giving up the chance to even look at other questions that you might be a lot better at. And of course, those questions might get you points, whereas the question you spend like 3 times the amount of time on might not get you a point. Remember, every question's worth the same amount. So definitely, look at all the questions at least. At least look at all of them. If you think you can't answer it, maybe move on so you can see the other ones, right? And you can always go back. So that's what I'm trying to say. And one more thing I want to mention before we go is some general reading strategy. And this is on, if you go to if you go to the ACT Prep tab on Joiner English, and if you don't go on any of the days, but you just click on the ACT Prep button, not any of the things that pop down from the arrow, but just the ACT Prep button. Let me show you what I mean here. So if you look at, let me scroll over to Joiner English here. If you look at, under ACT Prep over here, right? And you just click on ACT Prep. Just click on ACT Prep. Don't click on any of the days. They'll come down, but just click on ACT Prep. And you scroll to the bottom, you'll see a Steps to Success guide right here. And there are a lot of general strategies. I want to go over a few of these reading general strategies. So I'll open this up in a new window here. And reading general strategies, I wrote kind of general strategies for each section of the ACT, because each section has its own, kind of tricks to it. And since this is not opening up, I am just going to come over here and do this over here. So it says, I wrote 20 seconds per question, which is really good, right? 20 seconds per question should be enough to answer the obvious ones. And then I said 40 seconds for evidence-based questions. Don't, waste more than a minute trying to hunt for those, those answers that are hidden in the text that they don't give you a line number for. Don't spend more than a minute, right? 40 seconds is enough for those questions. If you can't find it, move on. And remember, 20 seconds per question. You should spend about 3 or 4 minutes reading the passage fully before you even get into the questions. Now, it's like a whole page to read in 3 minutes. It's a little bit hard, but, train yourself to read faster. And that'll give you more time to answer the questions and to go back to the text. If you spend too much time reading it for the first time, you're not going to have time to go back in the text and reread. If not sure, narrow down questions to 2 choices and go on which one feels better for you, right? So like I said a little while earlier, narrow it down to 2 choices maybe. Find the 2 dumb ones, rule those out, literally mark them out, and then there's going to be 2 more that, you can decide on which one feels better. Which one's more, which one is your gut instinct leaning toward? They should be pretty obvious to the instinct. Yeah, most of them at least. Not the evidence ones, obviously. Don't spend too much time on those, but if you know the passage well enough, you'll get those automatically. But most of them should be pretty obvious to the instinct, right? If they're not explicitly stated. Okay, so remember, it's 40 questions, 35 minutes. So you have fewer minutes than you have questions. So you need to answer more than 1 question per minute. Sometimes... That's why I said 20 seconds per question, along with reading the passage. You can't spend, exactly a minute on every question, because you have to read the passage too. So that's why I said 20 seconds per question, 40 seconds for evidence-based questions. Okay, I hope you all enjoyed this lesson, and if you all have any questions, feel free to contact myself or Miss Joiner, probably myself for ACT Prep, because I've been, doing Miss Joiner's ACT Prep for a few years already. So definitely contact me for ACT help if you need any, and, go over the Steps to Success guide. Go over, watch this video again if you need to. Go over any of days 1 to 5. You can go over your diagnostic test or any of your practice tests that you take. And remember, you still have a lot of time. You're in 8th grade right now. If you go on and you want to take the ACT early in 9th or 10th grade, then you're going to have to work a bit harder. But most people take it in 11th grade. So you have some time, to study, and you have some time to kind of digest the knowledge we went over today. Remember, the ACT success does not come without practice. You might think, well, it's a standardized test. It's supposed to test how smart I am. But no. The IQ test tests how smart you are. The ACT tests, number one, in first place, how much you've practiced, and number two, how smart you are, right? What I like to say is you kind of, have a body of knowledge in your head. And this body of knowledge, it's only so big, right? Some people can only get up to a certain score on the ACT, and that's okay, right? If your knowledge doesn't allow you to get to that kind of score, or if your IQ, doesn't allow you to get to that kind of score, that's definitely okay, right? Different people are made differently. But what I view studying and practice as is kind of, if your mind is a funnel, all your information is stuck at the top of the funnel, but you want that information, to flow out the bottom onto the piece of test paper. So you need to you need to make the bottom of the funnel bigger, and studying makes that bottom of the funnel bigger. Obviously, you can only put on the paper so much as but in order to get all of that knowledge onto the paper, you need to practice and study. So hopefully you all will study a bit more, and come and ask me for help if you need any. I hope you all have a good day. Stay safe and healthy. Thank you.